Hey folks, welcome back. I'm on a bit of a roll at the moment, so I'm jumping straight back in with a hashtag coffee house decks created by 𝗪𝗁𝗍𝗔. I've watched a bunch of these already and thoroughly enjoyed them. I try to stagger how many deck type tags that I do, but this one has just lured me in the end, which is hilarious because my experience with coffee as a whole is infrequent because I'm not allowed to drink caffeine. So I miss my dear coffees, and yeah, I'll have to live through it this way. I've zoomed right in, as you can see, and I've gone for a bit of a tilt in the angle. Hopefully you won't notice, but the overhead lighting is something of a nightmare at the moment, and a few of these decks are a little shiny. So with that, let's jump in and see how we get on. So number 1 of 13 is the Espresso Shot, and this is a deck that's strong, punchy, and gets straight to the point. I have stayed with the prompts because, as I say, I don't know many of these coffees very well at all. So in terms of strong, punchy, and straight to the point, I have selected my Wild Unknown deck because, to be honest, I've just had it so damn long. It's like I would imagine it is for many people in terms of, say, the 𝗕𝗿𝗄𝗃𝗁, and having that visual recognition, you know, in your mind's eye. I have that for the 𝗕𝗿𝗄𝗃𝗁 as well, obviously, because of the sheer amount of studies and just being flooded with its imagery. But when it gets to linking it in terms of these words, I find this to be quite punchy. It's simplified scenes, the symbols, the colours, you know, the line use. To me, it sort of just hits the basic things that I pay a lot of attention to aside from what I already know about tarot, and it hits them quickly. And it's not really only punchy for that reason, but I feel like this deck is a little cutting at times. I'm not sure I would have said that in the beginning, but it's very hard to explain the undertone. It's definitely there. And yeah, it's a straight shooter. That is definitely something I would call it. I have done a lot of other things with it, poetry and such, but this is my straight shooter. Prompt 2, the Drip, a deck that's simple, accessible, and gets the job done. Please hear me out before you jump in the comments. The Mesquite Tarot. But when I say this is accessible, I mean to read. Accessibility has so many nuances to me. So another example of its accessibility in my life would be that its size. It's quite small and it doesn't hurt my hands to read. However, it is the most slippery tarot deck I have ever owned. It's being really well behaved at the moment. It's very slippery. And it's just an incredibly easy reader. I'm not sure that this would be the general vibe, but of course I'm talking about for me. Unless I'm ever recommending something to like the collective, just assume I'm talking about for me always. So yeah, that is something that I find is quite accessible about this, and it embodies that kind of, that simplicity. It comes back to core colours, core themes, core symbols that are incredibly recognisable to me. In terms of accessibility for purchase, it is not accessible in the slightest. So I definitely want to acknowledge that point. Please don't at me. When I think of a simple deck, I have always felt that this is akin to like my pip decks, except it's not a pip deck, which makes it even easier for clients to be able to vibe with it a little bit more as well. It does have pippishness in points. Again, this is not an always thing, but it very much gets the job done for me. I am fond of it, but it's not my favourite deck in the world. I definitely don't feel like I would part with it, and also you would absolutely have to fight me for the guidebook. The guidebook definitely embodies the simple, accessible, gets the job done like mood, but it's not lacking quality. It is an absolutely epic wee thing. I have spoken about it a lot, I know, I'm very sorry. It's an epic guidebook. I can't help it. Prompt 3 is the Pour Over, a deck you need to take your time with, but totally worth the effort. At the moment, this is the Tarot of Vampyres for me, as we're not fully familiar with each other. I really want to work with the guidebook to better ingest all of its offerings this year. And I feel once I'm aware of the symbolism that the creator has included in the imageries, then I'll enjoy more of what I do with the artwork, so contemplating the layers and the animals and the colours, movements, positions, all kinds of just fun storytelling shit. But it's a process, and I have been pretty busy of late, especially as everything takes me twice as long as before I was disabled, so it's going to be a slow ride. I just don't feel like I know this deck yet properly at all. I definitely would have said that a few years or so back the 𝗪𝗊𝗄𝗃 would have been my pour over, and I can safely say that it was completely worth the time. So I have faith in my experience with this deck, because there are similar ways that it intrigues me, even though it's such a different deck and quite a different approach. But there's a lot to be seen in here, and I notice all of the little hidden symbols. Well, not really hidden, but you know, I notice those things, and I want to take in what the creator has meant by them and what they're intending. Number 4 is the Cafe Latte, a deck that's well received and highly palatable. I really feel like the 𝗬𝗃𝗁𝗃 𝗀𝗄𝗃 has been one of those decks online that kind of swept through the community in a haze of warm, fuzzy feels and enjoyment for many of us who like the idea of animals being all whimsical in the woods, that kind of animal kid vibe. It is removed from the realities of animal life in many ways, but I don't mean any shade to the deck by this. I have decks that do the full scope of wildlife and nature in general, and I enjoy this for what it is. But I do feel it's super palatable for that reason. It caters to those who aren't okay with the animal decks, like perhaps the Brady Tarot. I enjoy it. It's very cute. That's definitely the word that I come to, and I tend to use it with an oracle just to give it something extra, but it's not necessary. I don't, again, feel boxed in by this, but it's definitely got that palatable vibe, and I feel arguably this is very popular. Number 5 is the Cappuccino, a deck that's classic, sophisticated, and maybe a tiny bit fussy. I definitely think that I've lent into the fussiness and the sophistication here. I don't know if this counts as a classic. I feel like it would have been, but this is the Victorian Fairy Tarot, and again an out of print deck. I really hope they bring this back. I feel it's classic in the way that they were something that was pretty classic of a time that family members were in and around, and that's why it was something that I was introduced a lot to, the Victorian fairies and the flower fairies, that whole kind of era of the fairies that don't really remind us of the fae, but then still have something about them. They would fancy themselves sophisticated also in this fairy realm of like the Victorian making. It is definitely intricately and thoughtfully woven in. You can see it in their attire, you can see it in the hints of architecture that's in there when they're not in and around nature. So definitely some sophistication, or at least what a lot of people would have associated as sophistication at the time. I definitely feel like these lot would prefer high tea rather than a coffee meeting. And when it comes to being fussy, I feel like it's fussy in a fabulous way. I mean, the detailing alone is, again, I'm going to come back to that word, intricate. The fairness that still comes through has a fussy edge to it. And then there's just the simple fact that it has the suit name changes, and also there's, I think, a couple of majors maybe. Yes, awakening. Nothing that rocks my boat particularly, nothing that doesn't make sense to me, but again, it's got that little added change up that, and we've got one of the quartz here that just adds that little extra fussiness. It's definitely a mood. I don't even feel like if this deck could get up and start talking that it would be bothered about this at all. I think it would feel that it was definitely sophisticated and fussy. Number 6 is the 𝗧𝗧, a deck that's rich, indulgent, and a bit extra. I cannot do a video without the freaking Brady Tarot. I'm sure I do, but I love this deck. I love it. And while this is definitely one of my sharpshooters in its honesty, in the truth of nature that it depicts, it's definitely a well-balanced deck too. It's not without its richness of symbolism and detail. Just a random one upside down. Meaning, when it comes to indulgence, the stock quality definitely makes it feel like an indulgence, like an extra. Not my favourite indulgence, although it used to be. I've definitely changed. It's got that really thick rose petal stock. It feels fantastic, but it really hurts my hands. Especially with this larger edition, it feels extra in that way. And even my first edition of it is sitting in my altar at the moment in its bamboo box. If that isn't a bit indulgent and a bit extra, I don't know what is. It lives for being a bit extra. But I also find in the more challenging imagery, sometimes that can be quite confronting for some people. And also, I want to say, back to indulgence, they will not separate today, that because animals are my favoured realm in tarot for sure, I am literally swimming in indulgence when I use animal decks, and especially this one because it's just so damn loved in my selection, or collection rather. It's a good time. This is where the tarot just hits the spot for me. Number 7 is the 𝗧𝗏, and that is a deck that's balanced and objective. This is the mass market antique anatomy, and it gets to the bones of it. Pun intended, but genuinely I feel this way too. I never really enjoy the word simple for decks because I feel it doesn't do them justice. It doesn't offer that breadth when contemplating the quality, intention, symbolism, etc. So balanced and objective is a much fairer term for me in relation to the reading experience of this deck. The artwork isn't going to necessarily purposefully provoke me in the same way as, say, the Brady Tarot. It could still occur in a reading, but then I feel like that's much more driven by myself, the question, the other layers, not so much the actual artwork, which to me has this kind of gentle, macabre and Victorian quaint kind of vibe. That's what I'm going with anyway. I'd be really curious to hear what other people think, but I freaking adore this deck. And I go to it time and time again because it gives me that room to breathe, because it feels like a very balanced space to be in. And sometimes that's exactly what I want, depending on where I'm at. I'm going for nice and concise to really lean into the coffee vibe today, and we're rolling into number 8, which is the 𝗺𝗁𝗃. Hopefully I've pronounced that correctly. You'd think I would remember from watching so many. A deck that puts you in your place but with a hint of sweetness, which was a really interesting concept. And the Raven's Prophecy is the deck that I've always felt really held by, despite the sometimes cutting to the core imagery, or kind of, I don't know, it moves away from these warm, busy swirls of colour and texture into these starker, not stark, but in contrast, they're starker images to the rest. That's a place that I enjoy. It's always been another straight shooter, but it's also one that I went to almost solely during some really trying times and some heavy points, and for whatever reason it feels like it offers that uplift, that promise of something else still. How interesting, from the Ten of Swords to the Ace. Yeah, that's a lovely description of that promise that it offers me. I feel that it embodies this so well, and perhaps it's my affinity with fire, or my love of warmth, my deep appreciation of ravens, and also deers, which are the 2 animals that feature throughout this. And really just being able to see myself in the cards, being able to become the hand or be the bearer of these tools, but without the noise of the human structures of community, you know, that's not really visible in this tarot depiction. Next up, for number 9, we have the Chai Latte, and that is a deck that's warm, cozy and nurturing. And as I decided to stick with tarot for this entire one, I struggled with this question the most. I almost opted out of doing it, but I like to kind of challenge myself, and the difficulty is what's nurturing to me is less often cozy still. When I think of that, I think of comfort, and most of my decks entice some discomfort, especially the tarot. That's the kind of taste that I have, I suppose, as well as how I relate to the artwork. Even the balanced ones, it just means there's a fair amount of both in there for me. But in terms of warmth, this is definitely the warmest, coziest deck I have, and this is the Gentle Tarot, if I haven't already said. So gentle's kind of woven in there. I have a really weird on-off relationship with this deck, but I do find it to be those things. It's more gentle than nurturing for me, but again, it's all subjective. That's just my personal sort of nuance with that. And I do feel that nourishment and things were intended just based on what the creator shared about their approach and what's in the book as well. What's interesting is when I was thinking about this, I have decks that I wouldn't associate with these things as a whole, but there have been times when they've been super cozy and nurturing for me. So one of the ones that's been doing that recently is the Fallen Angels, which has been very nurturing for over several months, and usually it's full of sass and fuckery and just sitting with quite a few challenging feelings, which again you can do in this, but in terms of like the Fallen Angels is not overall a warm, cozy, nurturing deck. It's just not. So it's interesting to think about that too, and how that changes during times that we use our decks. But yeah, the Gentle Tarot, it feels very warm to me. It does have a soft touch. Going in now for almost the opposite of this, at number 10 is the Matcha Latte, and that is a deck that's an acquired taste or a bit unconventional. And I think that that's quite a tame way to describe the Cursed Auguries. I still believe this to be the deck that is my most acquired taste, and not necessarily for me, but definitely based on others and the responses that they have shared with me, it's been really, really mixed. I also know people who have really loved the idea of this, the artwork, you know, the mood, and then they get it, and as much as they love the concept, the reality of reading with this has still felt like a struggle for them because of its just unconventional offerings throughout. It's kind of gnarly, which I personally love. It feels witchy, but not that washed out, over cute, new age kind, but something else. It has pips that, if I'm honest, they don't inspire me much beyond the representing symbol, so apple for this, and then the rest of it boils down to the numerological and elemental associations that I have going on. I do love the symbolism of the pips, but they don't potentially inspire much visually. And all that said, I love it. It's fucking weird, but not that weird to me at the same time. I don't know if that makes sense to anyone else. It makes perfect sense to me. And it messes with some people, and that just kind of makes me chuckle, if I'm honest. Because I have a bad sense of humour. So yeah, this is my acquired taste. 3 more to go. This is number 11, the Hot Chocolate, a deck that speaks to the younger version of yourself, or a younger version of yourself. I always show the Pagan Cat Tarot. So for a change, and also really taking it back to the roots, I'm sharing the Mystical Cats Tarot instead. And while this becomes wildly underused in my practice in recent years, I will not part with this deck. It's too much of a significant factor in my return to tarot studies as an adult, and it was the whimsical cat characters that really did it for me. They just perfectly traverse the line of that magical cat realm into retaining mostly everyday cat behaviour. So you can see like a mixture of those two examples here. Both creators love cats, which is a bonus point. The actual paints were infused with catnip. Like I can't. I would have adored this as a kid. I know, because every layer of my being felt the echo of excitement when I very first saw this deck. Every time I have it out, that part of me wants to read or even just play and peruse it. I've read for my cat with this deck too, for shits and giggles, so there's that. It brings me to a nostalgic place that is quite a healing one for me, and I just really appreciate that about this deck. Number 12 is the Italian Soda, which I definitely haven't heard of. This is a deck that's fun, low-key, and not overly serious. There were 2 that I had for this one. I did feel that the Trionfi della Luna illustrated pips would have been beautiful for this prompt as well, but if I'm taking it back to the first deck that I felt like this with, then of course it's the Halloween Tarot for sure. And that's not because I just use it for fun. It's actually another solid reader. I know I sound like I'm on repeat. I will use it at any time of the year, but it's still fucking fun. It has the sheer old school Halloween vibes for me. You know, before it felt like it became a reason for adults to dress up but look hot at the same time. That's fine, do you. It's not for me. This is that cheap or homemade or, you know, accessible outfits, childhood trick-or-treating with too much orange and black, and then dashes of shocking purples, bleached whites, gooey greens and blood red, because these were the signature colours of the vampire, zombie, devil, wicked witch, Frankenstein or Frankenstein's bride, black cat. You know, that was the mood, folks. They were the moods. You know, ghosts with just the sheets and then the cut out eyes. It doesn't take itself seriously at all, and that's why reading with it is all the more impressive, because it's so good. It's such a good reader. It really is. To me, this feels like a classic as well. I definitely would argue that it was a classic, but of course it didn't fit some of the other keywords for that one. It's too much fun, this deck, and to have a deck that is this much fun, that I still feel is super versatile, actually, is enjoyable for me. Like, I enjoy when we sort of look at something and assess it based on its outer experience, you know, its aesthetic, its cover, and then we get into it and it has all of these other things that unfold. And that's a really good reminder not to just judge things on face value. So yeah, Halloween Tarot, definitely my Italian soda. And last but never least is the Herbal Tea, a deck that takes things down a notch or helps you unwind, which is great because this deck is one of my favourites of all time, and I freaking love herbal tea. So, you know, I will go to the Animal Wise Tarot for this vibe often. It's definitely comforting, but what I want to say to that is I think sometimes people then misunderstand my work with animals when I talk about this deck and it's not with other animal decks, and they don't, you know, perhaps know me very well. I don't enjoy reducing animals to just their nice parts. I don't think this deck does that either, but to me this is definitely one that has softened visuals and keywords in its approach. The benefit that I have is the vast and balanced amount of information already existing on animals just from my own work with them and my studies, so I'm never pushed one way or another. You know, this deck doesn't prompt me from provocative visuals, and it's not to say the images aren't wonderfully expressive either. They definitely evoke emotion, but it's just not the same response to, say, the Brady Tarot, or even if this was images that were more challenging, you know, say a photo of a polar bear that was gaunt and suffering because the planet is struggling with climate changes. Like, there is a much more neutral position in the photography in this deck. And the thing is, I still have all of that information. I'm still there. The environmental concerns, the changes, the wildlife care that I advocate for and participate with, I can still have all of that. It still exists within me. but this is a deck that I can choose whether I'm doing that with or not. And sometimes I really just like to allow these more neutral visuals and the words help me to just unwind. Like, it is game for all, this deck, and that's something that I appreciate about it, because I feel I can do both. And because I can do both, I'm comfortable and happy to enjoy this side of its offering. It doesn't feel like a cop-out to me. And I have always loved looking at animal photography since as young as I can remember. My favourite books were how to look after this animal or that animal, you know, you name it, whatever you could have as a pet back in the 80s. And any encyclopedias. Honestly, I was the encyclopedia kid. These kind of decks just really bring me to that space, and it definitely, I feel peaceful with it. And then if I want to do the other stuff, I definitely do that with this as well. But that's the really interesting thing about these kind of deck discussions, is even when I'm pulling in their personalities through these tags, there's always those nuances for me where I could only really describe it if I was reviewing the deck, because this is, like I say, this is one that I can do all of that and more with, but it definitely has the herbal tea vibe. So we'll pop it over there, and thank everyone for hanging out with me. I'm enjoying being around a little more this month, and I never know how long that's going to last for with everything else. So thank you very much to just everyone who's joined in on this tag. I might not have watched everything yet, I definitely haven't, but I very much enjoyed it. Amidst the grey, this was a great creation. It's a lot of fun, and I hope that you've enjoyed it. I'll see you again soon. Bye.